Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's a really short one this week, but the timing kind of makes sense because this is usually the time of year people are fitting in their last vacations, or if you're around here escaping from the gross humidity. Really, there's nothing quite like the smell of New York this time of year. Ugh. But anyway, let's jump in with the Q&As. First up, Sarah Phil wants to know if they'd be able to play a 240p Dreamcast game on a PVM, while the Dreamcast HDMI is doing its thing on an HD TV. So yes, as long as you set it to cable mode and all the resolutions are the same. So for example, the game Gunlord, that's a native 240p game. Same with the Third Strike, the same one I showed in the video. And if you set it to cable detect and put a either just a SCART cable in or the switchable cables where you could switch it to 15 kilohertz mode, if you do that, the Dreamcast HDMI will automatically detect that that's 240p and then scale that up to either 480p or 960p or whatever. So yes, in that case, it absolutely would work perfectly. The only way that wouldn't work is if you had a 480p game that's run natively in 480p and you want to get both native 480p output of the HDMI and 240p out of RGB. That won't work. So what will work is any other scenario. Make sure you plug in your SCART cable, have it set to 15 kilohertz, and then set the DC HDMI to cable detect, and that's it. Everything else should work perfect. And that would even work for 480i games, and it'll come out 480p. It'll just be the Bob D interlace. So wouldn't be the most ideal situation, but at least specifically for what you asked for, yes, it can and will work perfect. Sarah Phil had another question, and this brings up an interesting scenario. So since we have more time this week, I'm going to break this one down with a little bit more detail to hopefully explain it better. The actual question is, do you know if there's a better solution for connecting the G-Comp switch to the G-SCART switch other than the Garo and Kenzie method? So this is a scenario that's very common, and people have both component video and RGB SCART consoles and setups, and either just want a fully automated setup, or they might have a monitor that only accepts RGB input, or vice versa, and not both. So you'd need to convert the signal back and forth. So there's a few different ways to go about doing this. I haven't tested this yet, but I believe if you have the newest G-Comp and the newest G-SCART, you should be able to just use a custom cable, Retro Access makes them, that will go from the component video output to SCART, and the signal will stay component. It will not be converted, but if your target device, such as the OSSC and some PVMs, can accept both, then all you'd have to do is toggle their inputs. I think OSSC even has an auto toggle now, and for most PVMs, it's one button. Same thing with the BVM. So that should be a good enough solution. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but I believe the updated latest G-SCART switch has pass-through modes that would allow for things like that to work for these exact setups, as well as different things for sync regeneration and all that. If you have an older G-SCART, the ones with the VGA ports on them, you could use the port that's closest to the outputs and always default, as long as all the other SCART consoles are off, that will pass the component video signal through as well, but it's the same thing. It's not converting it, so you would just need a custom cable or something. And that seems to work fine. The only ones that won't work on are the G-SCART switch lights, they were called. That needs some kind of detection in order for a port to enable, so it would kind of defeat any workaround would defeat the purpose. You would have to convert it to component. From component to RGB. So that brings me to the second part. If you have to have RGB output, so you have like an XM29 that doesn't accept component video, or you just never want to press a button on your OSSC or your PVM, then yeah, something like the original Garo with component in and SCART out should be fine. People were having issues with that, but I believe that there's a few factors that go into why you would run into issues, and I've seen the same exact issues on boxes from Key Digital and others. So at the moment, yes, if you could find a Garo that has a SCART output, that's all you would need. Just, use some really short RCA cables and one really short SCART cable and kind of put that between them. I believe the newer Garos don't have SCART output, which people have told me that. I haven't seen it. The one Yossi sent me has a SCART output, so I'm not really sure what the deal is with that. But if that's the case, yes, you would need to take the VGA output and make a custom cable. If the new Garo has sync combining, then all you would need is a cable, which Retro Access could easily make for you. If you do require sync combining, that's something that I would feel better recommending that you have somebody test it on a scope. It should be super easy in a scenario like this, but I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth afterwards. Also, there is another device, let's just say rumored to be coming out by the end of the year. There's already a new really great RGB2 component that's I think either out or about to be out, and there will soon be the opposite of that component to RGB for these exact scenarios. So if the Garo doesn't work for you, or if if for whatever reason you just don't feel comfortable getting a new Garo, making a sync combining cable or whatever else, try to hold off a little bit longer. I'll try to, at the moment it's public, I will have it as a post on the website and obviously part of the weekly podcast. And I'm not trying to be coy or secretive about this. It wasn't specifically told to me that I could or couldn't make this public, and I'm always respectful of that. So it doesn't matter if you're friend, foe, or I've never met you before. I'm not going to divulge any information unless I've been given permission. I just think that's a fair and respectful way to treat things. So sorry for being a little bit shady about that one, but there should be a solution. And the other thing that I would really like to see too, so if any enterprising people out there can figure this out, I would love to see a double-sided SCART dongle. So a male to male or something like that. And imagine, I could imagine a few scenarios which would need something like this, or maybe not need, but make it easier. So imagine like you put one of those in the far output of the G-SCART switch, and then just stick the OSSC right on top of that. Not only do you have way less cable management, but there's no SCART cables to have a signal traveling through. So I'd certainly like to see that for something like the component to SCART or SCART to component and all that stuff, just so that you could have less cables. Now, there's obviously always shortcomings of that, putting pressure on the ports, blah, blah, blah. But, any of my fellow nerds listening are probably envisioning scenarios in which that double male dongle, that sounds like something Voltar would say, that thing would be useful for, and I bet you're also envisioning ways that could cause damage to your setup. So if anybody knows how to make one of those and wants to sell small quantities of it, I'm sure there's a few of us that would appreciate it for just for times like this. That way you would only have to get this new device and some short RCA cables to go from component to this device. But good question. Mr. Pete 1985 just ordered a GDEMU and wants to know if I have any suggestions for shrinking GDI images, and is there a utility that will auto-sort the SD card folders and rename all the GDI files? So no and no. A little more detail on that. I wouldn't shrink any of the GDI images. I would leave them their original size. The cost of SD cards these days is so disgustingly cheap compared to just a year ago that I would just leave them as is and not compress them at all. It's still money, so if you're still looking to save some cash, cool, but it's just my gut feeling on stuff like this is there's too much that can go wrong with compressing and shrinking any kind of image. I would always just want to preserve the best of the original as possible. And as far as a utility that will auto-sort, I wish there were more utilities for the GDEMU. The original creator didn't even make a GUI for it. That was the third-party thing. And there was an open-source GUI that was started, but not I haven't heard anything about it yet. I haven't been following closely, but that would have been awesome because that may have allowed you to do something like, do the auto sorting or only scan for new images when you want to, because that's kind of one of the drawbacks of the GDEMU is if you just load a ton of images on it, it will take a long time to load. But then if you pre-configure everything, it'll load instantly. But if you add another image, it won't appear. You have to go back and reset everything. So I would certainly love to see that updated GUI, open source GUI out there. And I would love to see somebody have like a toggle so it either searches every time you boot, perfect for people with smaller SD cards that just want to put what they need, or only search for games when you manually go into the settings and hit search. And that would allow people like me who just got a 64 gig card, dumped all my favorite games on it, and probably will just leave it as is forever unless some new homebrew comes out. So, I guess, unfortunately, my answer to your question is more questions. Sorry I was useless this time, but if anybody has any thoughts on that, there is allegedly a 64 gig Dreamcast pack floating around out there that's already pre-configured and everything with all the games that I would ever want. So maybe just Google around for that one. But if anybody has any better answers, please, I am all ears. And that's really it for this week. So if you just cared about the Q&As, feel free to just shut this off right now. I figure since it's a short one, I will do two quick things. First, I just wanted to remind everybody I am going to a bunch more expos. I'm going to a video game con in Jersey, as well as Retro World Expo, and the one in Portland, which I'm really looking forward to meeting some of my West Coast friends out there, especially the ones I haven't seen in a long time or have never actually met in person. So please, definitely come over and say hello. I promise, I swear, I'm not at all like I am in some of the mean tweets you might see coming from me. And if you do see those, please understand that there's also there would have to be a lot that happened beforehand for me to act on Twitter the way that I sometimes do. I'm trying to learn to ignore it, but whatever. And the other thing is I figured I would give a quick update on the gear that I've been using because I love it. And I know a lot of us are gearheads. So once again, Q&As are over. So if this stuff bores you, feel free to just turn this off. But I have kept the Rode mic that I told everybody about. I'm still using that cheap, junky $20 articulating arm, and it's fine. So for a situation like this where my setup is probably going to change a bunch more over the next year depending on where I have to move stuff to, the fact that I found something small that folded up nice and is already perfect, I'm going to leave that alone. Maybe someday if I have a more permanent setup, or if I plan, if I know for sure I'm staying more than another year, I'll go and get one of the really nice expensive ones that you don't have to worry about. The only thing that I did think was probably a good idea is when I'm done using it, I unscrew and kind of loosen everything up and then position it out of the way where it doesn't have much slack, because I figure a $20 arm is probably going to wear out quick. But then days like today, I position where I want it, I tighten everything down, and it's good. Also, I'm still using the Behringer Euphoria UMC 204 HD. I had never used one of these before, but a bunch of audiophiles across many different forums and platforms told me that I should check this one out. So I've been using it for all the vocal recording, and since it has two inputs, I've left the other input plugged into a guitar pedal so that I put my guitar through this, and it definitely sounds different than the Focusrite box I was using. I've been using the Focusrite Solo for years. I recorded the entire album that we did on whichever one of these is the first up that has its own power. I did that for ground hum reasons, obviously. Any guitarist knows about all that. And I've loved it so far, and it sounds different than the Behringer. So I think that's, for my use, that's kind of awesome. And if I ever get around to finishing the second album, which just needs to be recorded, I will do one guitar through the Focusrite and one guitar through the Behringer, because it's a different sound, and I like the way the Focusrite sounds for guitar, but I like the way the Behringer sounds for vocals better. So that's kind of a neat thing. And also, this is just, your standard microphone, but I still use the lav mics for the fancier videos, the one where I don't want this sticking in front of my face. And I still do the same thing that I talked about before, where I'll clip the mic to me and I'll use my Tascam recorder, and then I'll go close the door and all the windows and open up the closet in my bedroom and talk to the clothes to kind of deaden all the sounds and echoes. And then I just come back and re-record any of the parts where I'm on camera standing here. And when I was doing that, I needed a different audio interface for that. My choices were to either record on the same Tascam recorder, and then just have any other mic here, could even be like a Logitech webcam or something, to pick up the background noise, and then sync them together in post, and then kind of work on it that way. And while that was perfectly fine, it added a lot to post-production, and I'm not a videographer. I'm running a website and doing awesome stuff, and I also like to make videos. So any any moments I could save in post are moments that allow me to do other things. So I finally got a chance to test a backup device. I had done things like just plug the lav into a different kind of recorder or something like that, and didn't quite match up. So I got one of these it's the Rode VXLR Plus, and it's XLR on one side, and it's 3.5 millimeter on the inside. And you'll still, if it's TRRS, you'll still need the TRS adapter. But this, with phantom power turned on the Behringer, allowed me to record the exact same bitrate and wave file, I guess, as I did on the Tascam recorder. So I'm able to use the same interface now, and then link all the audio files up. And if there is a difference, you'd hear more of a difference in the fact that I'm talking to a closet versus talking in an open area next to a window. You'd hear that more than you'd hear the bitrate change or anything. And I do make sure to crossfade so you don't get that popping that you may have heard on some of my earlier videos when I did the method I just explained, but then recorded the lav through just some junky USB thing that couldn't be recorded at the same bitrate. That was actually, I think, Mark from My Life in Gaming that reminded me about that. If you record something at like 24-bit 96K and something else at like 16-bit 44K, when you go between them, you'll hear a pop. Premiere doesn't seamlessly stitch them together unless you manually go in and do that. So I think I have the setup done. I think it's awesome, and I think I like it. And I really like how versatile everything is. I like how I was able to put everything together. The only complaint, I guess, about the Behringer Euphoria is that I can't quite get it to work with Skype. So I've held on to my Blue Yeti. And to be honest, that seems to be a great device to hold on to anyway. And I know a lot of professionals hate it, but I still recommend it as a really great starting point. There's just so many things about it that take some stress away. So, you could get an articulating arm for it, a cheap one that works fine, but you could also just leave it on its stand and then just try not to touch the table so you don't hear the bumps. It has a USB audio board built into it, and it has a headphone jack built in. So for things like live podcasts, and a mute button right on it. So a lot of times you'll see me in interviews or on the Retro Roundtable, I'll finish a sentence really quick and you'll see me hit the button because like there's a siren going down the street or something like that. So I do still really think that the Blue Yeti is a great tool to have. It's not the best, but plug your headphones in. Now you're only tethering 2 feet away, so you don't need an extension cord. It's right there. It's got volume and gain and stuff, and you could switch it between unidirectional and omnidirectional. So overall, I considered selling it, but I'm just going to keep the Yeti as a backup. And I think I've nailed the sound part of things. As far as video goes, this is going to be the best it's going to get in this current setup. I'd still love a green screen and a slightly different tweaking on the camera, but overall, I love the lens. The background looks pretty cool if it wasn't such a total freaking mess all the time. And yeah, so that's my full rig rundown. Hopefully I didn't bore everybody to death with it, or hopefully you turned this off before I started talking about rigs. But I think I got it perfect for my setup. And if anybody is starting their own podcast or their own audio setup and has any tips at all, please let me know. I love to talk gear. Any extra moments I have to help, I always enjoy helping out with stuff like this. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. And I will see everybody next time.